Good evening. I'd like to call to order our special call board meeting, September the 8th. You will please stand for our invocation and pledge. Tonight I would like for us to have a moment of silence for the family of Kelly Cash. Kelly was a PEA at Green Valley Elementary School who passed away earlier this week. Amen.
Please join me in pledge of allegiance. Salute. Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Goodwin, will you do a roll call, please, to establish a quorum?
Stephen Presley,
Here.
Earl Hoover,
Here.
Fred Kelly,
Here.
Jill Yanis Beach,
Here.
and Deanna Bannon.
Thank you, Ms. Goodwin. A quorum has been established. Board members, you have before you an agenda for tonight's meeting. Can I get a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye. The agenda has been accepted. We will now have our presentation of our 2017 budget. And I'll ask the board members, if you don't mind, to ease out to the front so we can see the presentation.
And as our board members are doing that, I want to just take a minute, as I did last Tuesday evening, to thank Tina Hancock for her terrific work. Has been in our school district since June the 13th and has had her hands full in terms of preparing for this evening. And Tina, I just want to thank you again publicly for your work. Thank you. And your department.
Let me just thank you for coming tonight and thank you for sharing your time with us and your interest in Hoover City Schools. The budget package contains a form, a response form. If you have questions, you can write your questions and comment on this form and submit it. If you'll be kind enough to include your name, address, telephone number, and email, since this is the second public hearing, we will definitely address your comments or questions, but probably by email or phone call, so it'd be great to have that information. Let me just explain how the budget package is laid out. What the board members have is basically just a copy of the presentation, the proposed annual budget package that you, the public, has as well, and the salary schedules. The board also has the salaries, the proposed salary schedules at the end of their budget package. Let me just begin by explaining the budget process. This starts in the preceding spring when we receive the foundation units or teacher units from the State Department, when school and departments start meeting, discussing their staff. Each principal will meet with a team of district administrators to determine their staffing for the upcoming school year. Staffing is usually completed by mid-April, and as of this budget, it is 82% of the general fund budget is determined at this time. So as you'll see as we go throughout this presentation, that 82% of our budget is people. Principals and department heads also submit a budget for non-payroll expenditures for their respective areas of responsibility. That would be their local schools, and the department heads for their budgets that they manage. Budgets for federal programs are completing during the summer as funding becomes available. The state will let us know and send out documentation as that becomes available. The budget process is really just a tool to help us plan for the upcoming school year and what will best serve the needs of our student body. And let me just say, as I mentioned, the salary schedule, this salary schedule is based upon the 2% and 4% raise that the state legislature passed. One unintended consequence that we noticed while we were preparing that salary schedule is those employees that are borderline of the 75,000, which was the threshold for the 4%. If they were just under the 75,000, they would receive the 4%. If you were over the 75, you only received the 2%. What happened with that, the unintended consequence was those that were borderline 75 jumped up over some of those that were right at 75. So we found that that is an unintended consequence. One thing that we spoke to the other night is that we have noticed that we said 17 employees, but there were some staffing changes, so it's actually 19 employees, and it affects us at $38,000 to get 4% across the board. So $38,000 for a 4%. This salary schedule is prepared based upon a 2% for over 75,000 and the 4% for everyone under, and then teachers and administrators. Just the general information, we have currently with this budget 201.27 local units. That means those that are funded by the school board. And we'll get to those other units that are funded by the foundation program. But our projected enrollment is 13,916 with 1,104.5 administrators and teachers. And you can see that it's broken out by the various schools there. And this next PowerPoint, or this next slide, basically just talks about what we submit to the state. We call it the B1 report. It's basically just a combined budget of all the revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balances. And I kind of did this so that it would help you in the future as you're looking at the financials, because the financial statements are displayed in the same format. So the teacher came out in me to try to do a little bit of a class on how those financials and this budget is formulated. The first column that you will see is the general fund, and that is important because that is the money that is not as restricted to what you can use it for. Now, the state funds are a little more restricted than what our local taxes are used for. When you hear people talk about the general fund or the general fund balance, or you hear the State Department talk about a general fund analysis, this is what they're basing that on. This is where they determine what our fund balance is. And we are required as a board to have a 1 month reserve or fund balance in order to prepare for things that may happen in the future. So this is what they actually analyze. That first column is the general fund budget. The next 4 columns, the special revenue, debt service, capital projects, and expendable trust, are restricted funds. They are money that is on our books. Special revenue is usually federal money. Debt service is exactly what it says it is, debt service. Capital outlay is for our capital projects. Expendable trust are those boosters and PTO accounts that are on our books as well. And those funds are restricted. We don't just get to spend those and carry over a balance every year. You can carry over balance in some of those funds, which is why we'll talk to fund balance in just a moment. But you can only spend those for the things that they specify. For example, debt service, you only spend that on your debt. Capital projects, that is only for capital projects. The expendable trust fund, that is where the boosters or the PTOs will make decisions. Their boards and their committees will vote on how they spend that money. We act as a trust agency. It is held at the local school, but we just act as the trust agency, but they make all the decisions as to how that money is spent. The next slide is basically a breakdown of that previous report. Revenues versus expenditures, then other fund sources or uses. If it's a negative, it's a use. Positive, it's a source. And then the excess. You will see that our total revenues are $167 million. Our expenditures, $169 million. Other use or other sources are $335,000, leaving us with a deficit balance of $1.8 million. And again, we are not saying that, oh yay, hallelujah, we got a better fund balance, but this is definitely not a balanced budget. But considering that we were at a $10.4 million deficit last year projected, and we're at a 1.8, I feel very confident that we're gonna get to where we need to be. So with that, you will see on the bottom line is the excess revenues and sources. So you will see where that 1.8 is comprised of. We will gain 4.9 in general fund, which that's the one that we will carry over. 184,000 in special revenue. And I meant to have a little more explanation about how that balance got there, but that is basically our payment versus what we have to, the way we record some of those local taxes in that fund. That's the way the state requires that money to be recorded. It's a pledge that we made at some point in time for that $2 million to show up there. Capital projects will have a gain of 1.1 million, and expendable trust a gain of 655,000. So that's how the 1.8 is comprised. And this slide just speaks to fund balance, because that's at the bottom of your of the financials that we present every month. That's also the bottom of this budget. The projected ending balance, your first column there, or your first row, the projected ending balance is what was projected with that final amended budget for 2016. So you will see that that comprised of the projected ending balance was 92 million, or 92.9 million. The proposed ending, and that's what we predict that we will start with. Again, we won't know those definite numbers until we close the books and we finalize everything for this year and see exactly where we're at. The proposed ending fund balance is where we are projecting with this budget to be. Our general fund we expect to be 73.5 million, and if you notice from the page that we were just, or the slide was 4.9 million, so there's the gain. So leaving us with a total balance of 91 million. So I hope that maybe helps out even when you're reading the monthly financials of how this is broken out. Our total budgeted revenues for this budget: general fund 142 million, special revenue 16 million, debt service 2, capital projects 4.7, and the trust fund 2.5, leaving us with a total budgeted revenues of 167.6 million. And this was just a way that it is broken out on the financials, and I just wanted to highlight that a little bit. This is just a pictorial graph of those percentages. Of course, we know by looking at that our largest percentage is going to be the general fund, and that's due to the local taxes. Our revenues by source, again, just another way that report is laid out is what do we have in state, federal, local, and other. State, we received 74.4 million, federal 6.5, local 86.2 million, other, that would be other sources, 430,000, with a total again of 167.6 million. And again, we see as well that our largest is going to be our local money. This just basically explains the difference between the revenue per pupil versus enrollment. And as we just saw on the previous slide, we projected enrollment to be 13,916, and what we spend per pupil is 12,209. And if you look at previous years, you know, you can see the gap closing a little bit compared to what it was actually in 2008. We're getting a little closer to where we were in those good years, or what I consider good years when we were well funded. And you're going to see in a moment where we've received more funding from the foundation, and that is going to help explain how that gap is closing a little bit and we're able to spend more per student. This is a sheet that we received from the State Department that determines what our allocation is. This is what they send out in the spring. So with our ADM, or average daily membership or enrollment of students, we had a change of a negative 46.75. But then they lay out what our foundation units are, what we call foundation units. That's how many teachers we receive, how many principals we receive, assistant principals, counselors, librarians, career tech coach. So what the state provides for us is 868.48 teaching units. So we had a gain of this year from last year of 5.37. That does not mean that we hired 5 more teachers. That basically just means those teachers are now paid from the foundation program instead of the general fund. This is just another highlight of how those monies are broken down in comparison between 2017 and 2016. and what we receive. This is what we call CIS money. You may hear that spoken to a little bit, but teachers receive $405 per unit or per teaching unit. Technology, $163.79, library enhancement, $21.26, professional development, $63.79, and then textbooks, $54.07. Those are the things that money can be spent for. So each teacher will receive that amount of money to spend in their classroom, more or less. Compared to 2016, student materials went up a few dollars, technology went up $100 per unit, library enhancement and professional development stayed the same, textbooks went up a couple of dollars. So with all that, and with the gain that we had as far as salaries and fringe benefits, that gives us a $3.2 million gain that we had from the foundation. So the state sent us $3.2 million more than they did last year, which helped in having us spend more money per student. Some other state funding that we receive is school nurses, technology coordinator, transportation operations, transportation fleet renewal, capital purchase, at-risk, and career tech operations and maintenance. You can see the different changes, which gives us another gain of $367,000 that we received from the state versus last year. And you can see, looking at that doesn't cover a whole lot of nurses. When you talk about salaries and fringe benefits, technology coordinator, that does not pay for one. I don't know of any across the state that would pay for. Transportation operations is where we gained a good bit of money, which definitely helps out with our maintenance and our custodial staff. And then fleet renewal, this is where we can, I'm sorry, I said transportation operations, I meant transportation and our bus drivers and parts. But fleet renewal is where we get to buy buses, and that's the only thing that you can buy with that fleet renewal money. You cannot spend it on anything else. Capital purchase, we saw a small gain. Again, that is in that capital outlay column. You only spend that for capital projects. At risk, I've had some questions about that. At-risk money is for those students that have been identified as possible dropouts, and that's where that money goes to fund, a teacher unit and some supplies that will help them progress. And then, of course, career tech operations, and I don't know why, with the new plan 2020, why the career tech money went down when it should be going up. Some of the major revenues within the general fund, and this does not include everything within the general fund, but these are some of our largest revenues. Foundation, state, and local match. And what that local match is, in order for us to participate in the foundation program or receive money from the state, we have to provide, our match is $15 million. We have to provide $15 million of that, of our own local money, to actually get money from the state for the foundation program. Local, $58.8 million, transportation operations, $5.2, Alabama Reading Initiative, $508, and that was cut in the spring. They came back in the summer and made it whole, but it will be cut for the following years, and it's going to be a significant cut. We were looking at about $150,000, I think. State Nurses Program, $480, At-Risk, $216, and National Board Certified Teachers, $700,000. Our local revenues, Jefferson County is the 22.1 mills, 20.2 million. Shelby County, 8.6 million. Hoover City, 38.7. Medicaid, 300,000. E-rate, 240,000. Interest, 100, and then the city and front door fees, 2.4 million. The 400,000 is what we have received for front door fees at this time. We are hopeful that that's going to be more, but again, it's hard for me to calculate it. I can't imagine who calculates that, but we are hopeful for the next year that we're going to receive more funds for that. So for the proposed general fund budget, this is that first column of that report that we looked at, and these are the main expenditures within that budget. So for instruction and instructional support, $106.8 million. Operations and maintenance, $18 million. Transportation, $5.6 million. Administrative, $3.3 million, and other $701,000, for a total of expenditures of $134.6 million. And again, 82% of that of those budgeted expenditures are salary and fringes, which you will see up here in this line back in instruction and instructional support, which is where it should be. It should be going back to our kids through teacher units to support those students. And another, just a pictorial graph of this, and again, as we just showed, 82% of that is instruction. So to kind of break that down a little bit for the instructional units, for regular teacher units, we have 857 in the general fund. For special education units, 83.69 in the general fund, and support units, 89 units. So the major budgeted items, again, salary and fringes, and this also includes supplements in this line item, 115 million. Materials and supplies, 5 million. Purchase services, 13.2 million. And purchase services, again, I never understand why they call it purchase services, because it includes travel, it includes fees, dues, that's associational dues, that type of thing. So I don't know why. It does also include some contracts, but they call the whole thing purchase services. The operations and maintenance budget, the total expenditures are budgeted at 18 million. We have 35 maintenance employees and 97 custodial employees. Again, you can see with that, that's probably the majority of that's going to be salary and fringes. At 6.6 million, utilities 5.6, maintenance supplies 2.2, and purchase services 3.2. And let me point out, the purchase services for maintenance are not up here. I mean, include some parts, which again confuses me sometimes because they're not in the supplies, but they're in the purchase services. So that's why that number looks so high at this point. The transportation budget, expenditures are budgeted at 5.6 million. We currently have 1 director, 3 secretary or clerks, 103 bus drivers, 41 special education bus drivers and aides, 9 shop mechanics and workers. And the way the state calculates this is we are funded $6,382 per bus, but only those buses that are less than 10 years old. And right now, we do not have every one of our buses funded. We have some that are older than 10. So we are looking to purchase more buses. We just had a bid the other day. So we're looking to get, we'll be purchasing 11 buses. Is that correct, Jeremy? 11 buses this year to try to help bring that up so that we can have a full fund. Well, I don't think $6,382 is a fully funded bus, but that's what the state's going to provide, so that every one of our buses will receive the full amount, and that'll be a little more money when we get that. So we're looking at by year 2022 having every bus funded by the state as much as possible. And with that money, as I just mentioned, was the fleet renewal. You can only spend that for purchasing buses. We haven't bought buses in the last couple of years. So that's the money that we're going to be using to purchase those buses. So for that transportation budget, salary and fringes are at $5 million, fuel and oil at $348, parts, supplies, and equipment are at $213. You may ask, why is the fuel so low? Well, look at your gas prices compared to where they used to be. Fuel is much lower, and as many miles, I think what was the mileage, Jeremy?
1.6 million per year.
Yeah, per year that we're traveling. That's not a lot of fuel that we're using, so I think our department is doing great on managing that. The supplements that are budgeted for the 2017 athletic, 1.3, non-athletic, 1 million, and let me point out that this also includes those that are paid by the local school, board paid, temporary or contractual employees, and any deferred compensation. And I want to point out the national board teachers. I mentioned that earlier. We received $700,000 for those national board teachers. We have 140 national board teachers. That is phenomenal. And if you ever read much about that, South Carolina is the big state with the most. They're the ones who promote that the most. But that is huge in the state of Alabama. And I think that speaks to something that we encourage our teachers to go through that process. And I've done it. It's a difficult process. It takes a lot of time and a lot of careful thought into actually what you do in the classroom. And I just want to commend our board and those teachers for actually going through that difficult process and time consuming. And with that, part of what I consider the reward, not just what the state sends for that, is that our board pays the benefits on that. The system I came from did not pay those benefits, so you got a little bit less, but I think that is a great reward that Hoover is able to provide for those teachers, and speaks highly of what they think of those National Board teachers. The general admin expenditures are budgeted at 3.3. Board of Education services are basically board services, and this also includes the legal fees, budgeted at $417,000. It also includes, and each one of these includes pretty much the same thing. It's just broken out by category, but it includes travel, training, fees, dues, some insurance services, some of our, especially in the business support, some of our softwares that we use for accounting, attendance. It's, all the different softwares that we use for business, our time and attendance software. The executive admin services includes the superintendent's salary, the assistant superintendent's salary, the secretary to the superintendent's salary, and all their fringes, along with travel, training, some insurance services that we have to pay to cover us in some different areas, and fees, dues, that sort of thing. Business support, that is basically my department, the finance and payroll. That includes the finance and payroll salaries. It also includes a lot of the contracts, as I just mentioned, the time and attendance, our accounting software. We use a program called SoftDocs. There's lots of different software maintenance agreements that are in there that includes that as well, along with travel, training, dues, and fees. System-wide support services, that includes some of the technology department, the chief technology officer and his assistant. That also includes some of the instructional support team, some of their salaries and fringe benefits. It also includes, again, dues, fees, travel, training, and some insurance services for their department. The next column that was on that first report that we looked at are the special revenue or restricted. The majority of these funds are federal funds, and of course, they would you would think those to be restricted. It also includes CMP, but some of those funds are also federal funds as well. And then the local school public funds, and if you've been to any of our booster or support organizations, you will definitely hear the definition between non-public and public funds. Public funds are usually what is at the principal's discretion and that the school controls, and they are very restricted funds. And this is the column that they are included in. So some of the major restricted funds here that we receive are Title I, $1.2 million, Title II for teacher and principal training, $141,000, Title III for English language learners, $108,000, IDEA-B, or some of you may know it as special education, $2.3 million, preschool, $37,000, child nutrition program, $6.5 million, local school public accounts, $3.7 million, Career Tech Perkins grant, $112,000, and then the after-school program, $1.8 million, for a total of $16.1 million are the revenues that we are looking at receiving. Again, just another pictorial representation. Our largest is CMP, but again, we'll talk about that when we get to that. There's also some daily sales numbers in there as well, so that they have the largest portion. Some of the major expenditures, again, I didn't break down every one of those. I didn't think you were going to be here all night listening to that, but the Title I, and the way some of these federal programs are administered is what you receive, you have to budget down to a zero every year. You have to show that you're going to spend every dime of that. So there's no, we do actually carry over. If you get to the end and you see that you didn't spend anything, they will allow you to carry it over, but you still have to budget it down to zero. So salaries and fringes are budgeted at 1.1, purchase services $31,000, materials and supplies at $78,000. So you can see from the majority of that, everything is in salary and fringes, and that's for those teachers to provide services for those students. IDEA-B, or special education, is $2.3 million. Salaries and fringes are $2.2, purchase services $111, materials and supplies $32,000. So again, you can see that the majority of that are for teachers' salaries and fringes. The child nutrition program is a little bit different. We receive reimbursements from the USDA based upon some of our free and reduced lunch students, and also some of our regular paying students. And then we also receive income from our daily sales. So our lunch reimbursement is budgeted at 1.7, breakfast at $502,000, commodities, $326,000, and our food service, or our daily sales, our income, is budgeted at $4 million, giving us a total of $6.5 million in revenue. And one of the other sources of income that CNP has is called the pass-through. And the pass-through is a state mandated raise that happened back in 1993, and there's this wonderful calculation that they send us that we get to do, that Melinda and I get to do. And you basically have to give some money back from those local taxes or from the general fund back into child nutrition program. And it's state mandated, they've required it, and that's what we do. So it's budgeted at $2.5 million. And again, when we look at the percentages, lunch is 37% of that, as you would expect. Child nutrition program expenditures are budgeted at $8.5 million. Some of the major budgeted items are labor, $4.4 million, and food, $2.9 million, supplies at $204,000, purchase services, $52,000, and indirect cost. Now, this is where we look like we're swapping funds. Indirect cost is where a federal program can, you don't have to make them, but they can pay back to the general fund for the use of the building, administrative services, use of any type of facilities, the maintenance department. So they give us back $681,000. We give them from the general fund for pass-through 2.5, and they give us back $681,000. It's basically just swapping money. So of course our major expenditures are labor and food, as it should be. And I will say Melinda's done a great job in reducing that staff and trying to get us in a really good shape as far as meals per labor that some of our, so is involved in our calculations of our reimbursements. Our debt, and you probably heard Dr. Murphy speaking to our debt in the financial presentation. What we budget for 2017 is our payments on the debt. And you see that we have the three debts that she mentioned, our 2005 capital outlay tax anticipation warrant, our 2010 refunded bonds, and our 2012 refunded bonds. Our payments total $10.7 million. Principal, we are only paying $3.2 toward that principal currently. Interest is $7.5 million, for leaving us a balance, an overall balance at the end of 2017 of $172 million. So you can see, as she spoke to in our financial presentation, if we were to have to close house and pay for that up front, we would be in a pickle. Capital projects fund, this is, again, as I said, was restricted to just capital outlay projects. We received money from the state totaling $2.8 million. This is also the local capital outlay match is another place that the general fund has to provide some money in order to receive money. So we get to keep that money and spend it, but we got to provide part of it. So our part is $1.4 million, and again, as we just spoke to, the fleet renewal $523,000, and every bit of that will go toward new buses. The capital projects plan, and that may be a little difficult to see, but we are looking at $2.9 million in budgeted things for roofs, HVAC replacements, HVAC software upgrades, some painting. The chillers are HVAC, but some of those things, and again, as we spoke to the other night, we know we need a high school band room at Hoover. We also know that we need some tracks resurfaced or maybe completely redone. So those are some of the things that we know that, and probably turf at Spain Park, but you know, these may be readjusted. This is a moving target with this capital projects plan, and it is in every system I've worked in and looked at, just because as you go throughout the year, you see, you know, your needs may be greater in different areas, and you may have to amend or change that. So those are some of the projects that we are looking at. And that is basically the end of the budget, but we had some questions the other night, and I just want to speak quickly to those. We prepared a packet for the board to look at. So they're going to take some time and review that and try to get their questions answered. And if you have some more of those questions, please let us know. We'll be glad to answer those. But they're going to review that packet and get back with us on that.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Hancock, for your presentation. This time, do we have any questions or comments from the board?
I have one question. I'm just curious, how much does a bus cost? Like,
One of the bids that we got back was $104,000. We're gonna try to, but typically $80,000 to $90,000.
Special services buses actually cost more than a
Exactly.
regular bus.
And we had $523,000 available for fleet renewal to buy 11 buses that cost $100,000 each.
Well, and as I said, there was some fund balance in that because we haven't bought buses in the last couple of years, so that fund balance is sitting there and you can't use it for anything else. So we decided to try to spend it and get as many buses funded from the state as we could get.
and so you get that
$382, yes,
per year for 10 years per bus,
yes, ma'am.
correct?
So the state funds $63,000 for a $100,000 bus.
Yes, sir.
I have some questions that, actually, John Anderson, in your Hoover Sun article, and Tina, I got in touch with, let you know kind of
Yes.
where my questions are. It was stated by Mr. Anderson that the discretionary money that was given to principals was cut from 85 per student to 25 per student. I believe that you told me that that's.
Yes, when I went back, and recalculated that, I'd left out a column when I was talking with him, because that was just off the top of my head what I was trying to remember. But last year they did receive $125 per student, and this year they're going to receive $25 per student.
And I just looked at the projected enrollment, went through Hoover High School, Spain Park, Berry, Bumpus, Simmons, Brooks Gap, and Deer Valley being the largest elementary school. Which is projected enrollment for this year was 2920 at Hoover High School. So I know these exact figures. These figures are not going to be exact, but just looking at Hoover High School with 2,920 students last year, $125 per student, that would be $365,000 in their discretionary fund. This year, it would be $73,000, so that's a loss of $292,000. Spain Park discretionary fund is going to be a loss of $165,400. Of course, like I said, it's approximate around. Berry Middle, $113,200. Bumpus, $84,700. Simmons, $80,000. Brooks Gap, $77,000. Then Deer Valley is $92,000. I'd asked Mr. Hewlin, with short today, I had to do some work yesterday, and he had printed out, because I was curious what this discretionary funds spent towards, and I don't know if this is for all principals, and I guess I asked this question: what point do y'all sit down, and Dr. Murphy plus Tina, I know it's come in, what point do the principals sit around in a circle, a principals meeting in a circle, and talk about what they spend their discretionary funds on? I mean, is that completely up to the principal? Any restrictions?
We have allowed our principals to use the discretionary funds at their discretion.
And I know with Mr. Hewlin, he actually has a committee, he says, that he appoints. I don't know about Mr. G or the other principals. In talking with Mr. Hewlin, his discretionary fund, he has sent, that's what he's used a lot of the money to send the Scholars Bowl math team, the Science Bowl, Mac Scholars, the couple kids here that were introduced by Dr. Dotson that got second place nationally, we paid for that travel for them. Actually, I of course Dr. Pepper all over this. but here it was broken down. Said the substitute teachers are paid out of the discretionary fund, is that right?
And, substitute teachers,
The substitute teachers are budgeted in the foundation or general fund budget. Now, they may choose to pay for some subs that they would reimburse us for if they want extra subs, or, you know, somebody's working, you know, doing something that they're gonna bring in a sub to let them work on something special, but they will reimburse the.
It's not taken out of their discretionary fund.
No, ma'am, it's not.
unless they choose to do
Unless they
that,
choose to.
unless they choose to bring some additional substitutes in for some purpose.
What kind of purpose would that be?
Well, if they're sending,
Monitoring,
you got teachers
exams?
going on scholarship trip to New York City for an extracurricular activity. John might say, hey, this is an extracurricular activity, I need to find stuff for these teachers so I can allow them to go too. So it wouldn't come out of the budget as a whole, it's not his discretion.
So you were saying they'd allow that sub to go to New York City?
No, sub to fill in
To
for
fill.
teachers with all the district.
Okay, and that wouldn't go out of the general fund, because they're going on extracurricular activity. That's the difference.
Yeah, I would guess, yeah, I mean,
Yes,
Understand.
the subs that we budget for are when those teachers take a sick day, or, you know, or even if, we have bookkeeper taking a sick day, those are the types of subs that we, budget for in our general fund budget or the foundation budget as well. But it, just as Mr. Cooper stated, if, you know, they're gonna send someone, you know, on a trip, they have to have a sub in that classroom for their students that are left. So the school may choose to reimburse the system for that money and, you know, get a sub to come in to fill in for that teacher.
When do we tell the principals that was going to $25 per student?
I sent an email out to our principals and said to them there was the possibility of no discretionary money, or at least very limited discretionary money.
And what was that sent out, like in the spring, when we're doing the spring?
A couple of weeks ago,
A couple of weeks ago?
yes. Principals were on notice that this was gonna be a very conservative budget, and that there was the possibility of no discretionary money, or certainly very limited and pulled back amount of money.
I've had a great experience with the Law Academy at Spain Park years ago, when Mr. G's here. I had one student then that clerking with me, and I'm telling him he could try a case better than some of my lawyers that were in that court. They traveled regionally and then nationally, Spain Park Law Academy, and I've heard that Hoover High School does that as well. Is that coming from a discretionary, or do we have that budgeted in, you know?
That would be at the principal's discretion to budget that. You know, they prepare their own budget, so, you know, they would budget that, and if they chose to, that's how they budget it. And then, you know, they, as we said, you know, this money is discretionary, they can use it how they choose to.
And I will tell you, the other thing that we've done is to go and take a look at each one of our schools and their accounts, how much money they have in their general funds, and in, obviously their clubs and organizations is separate and apart from that. But one thing that I was having some real difficulty with is to come to our board with a huge deficit budget, and ask you all to give us an okay on that, while sending money to schools that, when we look to their general funds, quite frankly, many of them in a really good position.
And their general funds then could fund the regional, the non-athletic kids are going to these regional competitions, or in the general fund of that school.
The principal has discretion over her general funds, but also of the discretionary money that comes from us to them that they can put in their general funds.
So the general fund balance, they are able to use any way it's not
Well, it's certainly,
restricted.
it's public funds, but as long as they're not doing something outside of the category of use for public funds, that's at the principal's discretion.
So, and I should know what these kids, because, they wanted the water that eco water project. And could a principal use the general fund money to send those students to that competition?
Probably would opt to use some of the discretionary funds that came into the general fund budget.
But with the substantial cut that the discretionary funds are undertaking this year, would they be able to use the general fund? Is that, if that's
Principal's discretion over his or
on the
her
general fund?
general funds, as long as it aligns with what's acceptable, and certainly what you're describing to me would sound acceptable.
Also printed out, like, you know, paper, office equipment, copier maintenance. Personally think copier people do that. If there's any copy people here, I don't mean to offend you, but with those Maytag commercials, when those repairmen, always, I've never seen a copier work without breaking down at some point. So that would come out, that could come out of their general fund to repair for the copier.
The copier funds, yeah, we are actually about to release a bid on copiers, and we will, we're gonna bid at price per copy, and then we're trying to gather information from the schools to see what they do provide, or how many copies that their school may use per year, and provide some of that, but anything that they would go over, they would have to be responsible for.
So we'll get it
Because
based on,
currently, we do pay for
enrollment.
some of those leases. Right now, some of the copiers are leased, and we pay for those leases.
But an outshoot of the IT initiative years ago has been to reduce the amount of copiers. required.
Absolutely.
Things about chairs and desks and, stools. Could that be somewhere in our, or not his general fund, but the school's budget to help, if we're short on chairs and desks and
Well,
stools?
You know, they do, you know, teachers do receive, money for materials and supplies from the state, and, you know, I know I've bought chairs, had that before in the past myself, if it's for the students, that they can use that state money, and again, they can, you know, again, it's at the principal's discretion as how they wanna spend that. If, you know, they want to give that to that teacher's classroom, they can.
I think it ought to be said here that, to that point, when my wife taught at Hoover, she said, if there was anything you needed in the classroom that was legitimately needed to teach these kids, you never went without. You know, there's some frivolous things, some extracurricular, but Dylan's victim.
Yeah, and I'm talking about, what depresses me at being on the board this time is the presentations that those young people, when they come through, what they have done on top of their schoolwork, on top of, you know, just going to class, we're winning. I'm not doing sports, I'm talking about all these college bowls, our math teams, that's we're in parents, we don't want that cut out.
You don't want
Yeah,
it.
that makes us unique, that makes
That's
Hoover
what makes Hoover
Hoover.
Hoover, yeah.
And many of those clubs and organizations also have their own individual fundraising opportunities where they put monies into supporting those
You've never
students.
seen
And I think, yeah, it's gonna be, of course, difficult for some of these organizations to raise the money for football. We have plenty of money there, because it's easier to raise, because they're making us freshman parents raise all. But, then we go to, you know, the team of two, it would be difficult to fundraise. The tennis team, I believe, he was girls soccer. Different sporting events do not have the gate fees. People don't even watch the sponsors that line the fields.
And hopefully that's where our athletic programs, who are the larger profit-making sports, can support some of our other.
So our, like, the Buck Club can gives money.
The
over
what
to-
club?
Well, whatever it's called, I think it's what Buck Club, it's the football boosters. Don't tell them I didn't know what the name is.
The Booster Club, the monies are at their discretion as to how they support themselves. Athletically, we could certainly talk to our two athletic directors in terms of whether there is some percentage or part of that money that comes to a central pot or pool that supports some of the other sports that are not revenue-producing sports.
That's the word, revenue producing sports. Okay, so that, you're saying that the parking fees gathered at Spain Park here is by night could go to tennis.
Certainly, our athletic directors and principals could sit down and talk about revenue, making sports, supporting more of those sports that do not really have a revenue stream, yes.
Could that go also to the academic scholars as well?
The athletic money
Yeah, yes ma'am, sorry.
could, but likely will not.
Right, okay, but there's still, I'm talking about just options, and that's not restricted, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
Certainly, I don't think your booster clubs are likely to do that, but certainly athletics could be supported with that pool of money from athletics. I don't see that going out to the academic side of the house.
I was in the courthouse during the recession of the government, and I know what it feels like to get cut. I hired a bailiff as my secretary. I had lawyers bring copy paper. And also Judge Vowell was our judge, and he gave us 6 months head's notice on it, and then that's when we got created. My concern, if they're just like 2 weeks ago, do the principals know just much is coming?
Well, I think in all fairness, the conversation about where we are financially has been ongoing.
Right.
And has been something that I've spoken to from the time I've come into the school district. And so we've been very thoughtful about, hey, there is no money flowing like milk and honey, that we're going to be thoughtful about all things from travels to discretionary money. So, yes, it was about 2 weeks ago that I said, hey, there's the possibility to none, to limited, but I just can't imagine that we're caught off guard by the fact that we have been very transparent about the fact that financially, we're gonna have to come forward with a very conservative budget.
And we were saying travel, we were talking about like seminars and training, we were talking about taking
Anything,
the
whether that's
students to
professional,
competition.
we've looked at everything, we've looked under every rock from cell phones to travel to registration for professional development, which we certainly don't want to cut out professional development. But we've been thoughtful about every part and parcel of this school district's money.
And I think it's what I'm saying, it's the travel, when you say the word travel, you're talking about the context of teachers getting their CUs or going to San Diego or San Francisco. Are you talking about the kids going
Oh,
to
no, not student
competitions?
travel, no,
We're talking
no.
about trying to find local training.
Professional
We did the
development
webinars.
We're woefully inadequate already.
Absolutely.
And I guess another thing too, that a couple points here, on the athletic side of the equation, it's not as simple as one might think, because there are kids who can't fundraise. You have to be taken care of as part of the booster operation there to sustain, so I'll be a good case in point. Professional development is a need as well. And it's my understanding, as you had this discussion with the principals, really all the administrative staff as well, I'm not saying, tell me what I'm misinterpreting. You didn't do a top-down approach. You said, look, here's what each of you are gonna have to, come up with in terms of cost cut. You can do discretionary fund, you can do programs like theater program at Simmons. You gotta tell me what works best for you. You are the manager, you're the site-based manager. And here's what we need. Tell me how you wanna get there. I mean,
Well, we clearly had meetings with our principals in the spring, where they shared with us, we talked about how many teacher units had been earned and what that side of the house would look like. We simply had a choice here, either continue to put a larger stream of money out to our schools, and again, we were very thoughtful to look to see where our schools were, so. But in looking what our schools had and looking at what kind of budget we wanted to bring to this board, I did make some choices. I did make some choices. So to say to you that, you know, I looked at the principals and said, okay, is it gonna be 25 or 50 per student per discretionary? I did not do that. But in understanding our role, which was to come with a very thoughtful and conservative budget, one of the areas where we could address, among many that we addressed, was discretionary money.
And Mr. Herbert, you just said Simmons and the theater, I thought that was back, the theater was put back, was that dealing with discretionary
That,
funds?
no, that was not discretionary, that was a principal choice about teacher units.
Is it back? I had heard.
Yes,
That was back.
he
It's back. The
found a
program is
different
back.
way to accomplish and meet a need.
Well, it's Monday night, we'll have opportunity for more questions, right? So I'm just kind of getting all these numbers, Mr. Presley, so I need to ask.
I want to ask a quick question about, the focal point of a lot of discussion here over the last few months has been deficit versus fund balance. And when I saw what you had up there, and I didn't catch this the other night, but it's probably a pretty obvious answer to not so obvious question. The fiduciary expendable trust component, that is, the funds that have been raised and maintained by PPOs, whoever, we act as a trust. You got that included in the actual revenue piece of it. And because it's really not school money per se, in the sense that something that she would necessarily be able to use, because it is tied to PTOs, isn't that kind of overstating or understating the deficit?
Not the way it's really, because, not really, I don't believe it is, because that money goes back into our students. I mean, that money goes back into the schools. They have a separate, process that they vote on that, how they're gonna spend that money, but again, it goes back into our schools. They can't spend it on anything else but our schools, or we've got some serious other issues.
Yeah, but when you talk about, you made it said a couple times, you know, that's good because it goes back into teaching.
But we show those monies on our books. That money flows through, it's part of the school account, and that's, and, you know, really, I mean, Dr. Murphy and I had the same conversation, why in the world is that on there? That, the state requires it, that is part of full disclosure, and so it has to be included, and that's something that they require.
Yeah, I get full disclosure, I'm saying, I don't, because it doesn't flow back to the classroom necessarily, because it is, well, it could. I guess,
It could.
You know, at least athletics probably not. I was just curious, that I didn't want to understate the actual deficit, because it's really not funds that we were.
It really, I mean, it is funds that come back to our kids, but it's not funds that we necessarily control, but again, they can't use it for anything else but our students.
Another question on the LEA allocation change, you got to pick up 5 additional units. Is that a rear-looking calculation based on attendance for last year?
It is based upon last year.
So since we're down 40 some odd students this year, we will have, they'll take some units away most likely, as things change.
Possibly.
Number 2.
And that gain also, and I should have mentioned this again, they changed the divisors in the middle school grades, and that helped that as well, and, you know, we won't know until next year when we see our units, what that's gonna look like.
Yeah, and like Mark, you mentioned somebody mentioned the 2020 program.
I did.
2020 guys gone, you know, so.
Exactly.
I say that again, if we talk about deficit and cost revenue components. We don't know where this whole bad boy's headed, you know, they're gonna do away with ARI, now what are they gonna do to substitute? You gotta assume that the program was successful. And they're gonna gut the program. And it's one thing to gut the program, it's a whole nother thing to start all over with a new program, because because you're pretty much discounting what's been achieved so far. So, that's gonna be a big expense if we decide to keep it or whatever we do, because we gotta have a reading program.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that Dr. Murphy had mentioned in her financial presentation. It's one of those state mandates that they give you the money up front, you get to spend it, keep it for a few years, and they pull it back and say basically it should now be self-sustaining. But again, we don't receive funds from anywhere else for those instructional coaches.
And after-school program income source, what, 1.2 million or something?
1.8.
Okay. Are those people captured in, how are the people who run that program captured? It's my understanding, it's really not a sanctioned program per se. I mean, do we, in your overall instructional support number, you capture all those people and all their expenses in that too?
They're in that, they're budgeted in that after-school program, that 1.8, they're budgeted in that
So
category.
So that's the net after their expense?
No, that's just the revenues we see coming in, and
Okay.
what's budgeted, is their salaries and fringes and so forth, and then the central office staff.
Okay, so it's rolled in there by all the other
Yes.
personnel?
And we have used some of that after-school monies for playgrounds.
Playgrounds.
And,
Anything that, anything that has, that we have left over, we try to roll that back out to the school.
Yeah, that's been a great thing for the district. Front door fees, I mentioned it the other night, that's a one-shot deal. Everybody shouldn't get giddy because we had 400 new homes built this year. You know, in addition to the amount per front door, it doesn't account for the long-term cost of students that might come outside their front door. So it's nice, but it's not end all be all.
Questions, comments from the board?
I do have a question. I now get the e-news for Hoover High School, and they're buying a printer that is going to be available in the library. Is there a lot of children, it's children that don't have printers? Is that something that is restricted or can come out of a different column, or does it have to be the general fund of the principal discretionary?
It could be either way. I mean, it would be, I mean, a printer is definitely classified by the state that the funds that they send for student materials would be, that would definitely be considered student materials. Or it would be at the principal's discretion to purchase that through their discretionary funds, however they choose to go about that.
Is their choice?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Any questions from the public? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about, first of all, the questions that I had asked the other night. Is that stuff in the packet for the board?
That is.
Could I get a copy of that as well, since I was the one that asked the questions? Before I leave, perhaps? That would be, okay. Also, one of the things I noticed when you look at the individual school budgets in the back is that there's this thing called other expenditures, materials, and supplies. And it varies greatly from school to school. I noticed Hoover High has a $300,000 budget for the materials and supplies. Spain Park has $63,000. Some elementary schools have zero. Can you explain what that variance might be?
Some of that could be, and
I can point it out.
let me verify.
Okay. It's under special revenue. Okay.
Yes, that would probably be what they budgeted at their school. That would be, because in the special revenue column, it's what is budgeted for the public, those public funds at their school. So it would probably be what they've chose to budget. And as to, again, that's something that the principals and the bookkeepers worked on, and probably their staff as a whole, you know, they decided how they were gonna spend that, so that.
Okay,
Trish,
because
would you point that out to me?
I will.
Just for,
Yeah, which school?
it's, I'm looking at, the pages aren't numbered, this one, the Hoover High School, towards the end, you know, those last pages with whole bunches of
Yes.
numbers on them? And if you flip to the backside, the 2B,
Yes.
the backside, and it says other expenditures, materials and supplies, you know, Hoover says 303, under special revenue, but under the fiduciary trust, do you see what I'm talking about?
Okay.
But under the fiduciary trust, it says 426, so I'm guessing that's like the
Booster.
booster money.
Yes.
But so why would the 303 be there when Spain Park has 63 and some elementary schools have nothing? What you're saying is that's just based on what they've chosen to budget?
Yeah.
They're, okay, I'm sorry, thank you. Also, I have a question, and it's more of a philosophical question. Mrs. Veach brings up the, discretionary money, and this is something that I've asked about for years. There didn't really seem to be a formula. I did some calculations last year. While it looked like Hoover High might have gotten 120 and Spring Park got 123, some elementary schools got as little as $50 per student. So there was some formula there that Mrs. Ante and Mr. Craig must have come up with somewhere along the way. But if we had more local money, there would be more discretionary money, right? I mean, is that not fair to say that that's where that comes from, that money that the council might have given us, that money that previous boards had the opportunity to fight for, to restore funding? Is that a fair statement?
Certainly, it's fair to suggest that if we had more money and I was not having to come forward to the board with a deficit budget, that there would be more money that could go out to our schools, yes.
Okay. Because that's what, you know, that's always been something that has been enjoyed by principals here in Hoover, that most principals across the state have no idea what the word discretionary money means. Okay, because I mean, I know it's a massive drop, and I know that those monies have been used. I got to play wild goose chase, chasing some of those forms down years ago to see what Greystone spent. You know, they spent money on arts and stuff, and then the freshman campus spent money on something else, and Mr. Hewlin spends money on professional development, so those are certainly all needs, but with the lack of local money, we can't give out that kind of money, is what I'm hearing you say?
Well, again, in terms of being thoughtful about trying to reel in spending more money than we're getting revenue, then it's painful. And there's not a single department that has not been impacted by this budget, nor is there a single school that is not being impacted by this budget. So we understand that, yes, whatever that formula used to be, and to the best of our ability, it looked like 125 last year to the 25 this year. We realize that's tough, and yet I think the pain is being felt, and I'm not enjoying this process at all, but I'm just not willing to come put before this board a continual huge deficit budget.
Thank you. And then one more statement or question, because I know y'all have asked a lot of questions about purchasing buses, about the cost of buses and that. And research that I had done when we were trying to save the buses showed that we chose for a couple of years the budget that y'all approved. You didn't buy buses. With the money that was there to buy buses for, the money was spent on personnel. It was a sort of a one-for-one transfer. Those were decisions made under a previous superintendent. And that put enormous pressure on, we lost opportunities to be recouping that $6,400 or $5,800 a bus or something that they were paying at the time. So this is not a surprise. I mean, it might not have been this explained to y'all that way, but those were decisions that were made by a previous superintendent to purposely not spend money that was there for buses to be spent on something else. And so I have details of that if y'all are interested, but we find ourselves where we are at this point, at this deficit now. We've got one of the oldest fleets in the state, is what I've been told, which is shocking for a place like Hoover City Schools to have such an old fleet. But those were deliberate decisions that were made. So I'm glad to hear y'all asking questions, but I think we do have a lot of catch-up to do to begin to recoup the money that we should be getting for a newer bus fleet.
I think there's some logic that kind of plays into that, and the time that decision was made, I don't know why necessarily, but from a logical perspective to me, if you've got, maybe you may have the oldest fleet in the state, but we've got one of the best maintained fleets in the state. And I remember Andy talking about how we got a bus that might have 90,000, 100,000 miles on it that just is in perfect running condition. And so would you go ahead and spend $90,000 more for a new bus to replace it and only get $6,400 or whatever it is per year? So it's just
There was definitely logic that was used. I'm just saying that logic put us in a deficit position farther down the road. The short-term decisions that were made put us in a deficit position down the road.
I think it's fair too to state that when we purchase a bus, we purchase the bus from our account, 100% of the cost of that bus
That's right.
when we buy it. The state does not pay us anything until the next year, and they pay $6,300 or $6,200 of that. So we're the one carrying the note, and
Sort of. fleet renewal funds are there, like, we can use the money that we get this year
Sure
to
they
buy
are,
buses now.
$523,000.
Right,
So that buys 5.23 buses,
right,
and we're trying to replace 11.
right.
Is Jerry, what's our average cost, this is a wild curveball hindsight, what's the average annual maintenance cost for a bus, roughly?
Probably,
Count mechanics, count parts, counting, you name it.
we've got a figure at the shop that tells us exactly how much it costs every day for us to run a bus. Our 18% cost that the school system incurs is about, if I'm not mistaken, it's very minimal. It's like $1.62, is that correct, Dr. Murphy? On the, formula we give you the other day. I think some of the things we need to understand also, we have $1.18 million in the bank with fleet renewal money. That's what we have now, and that's not counting the $500,000 that we will get from last year, or that we've got from last year. So that $1.18 million we're trying to buy $900,000 worth of buses. So we're actually not spending the complete amount of money that we have in the bank now. If we buy we're trying to buy 8 regular ed buses. Those buses are $79,000 a piece. The 3 special ed buses we're looking to buy are $104,000. So we're gonna have about $165,000 left over in the bank account even after we buy the 11 buses. If we can get those buses, the 8 buses that we have on order now, we can tie those to the qualifying route, and we can get our money for those on our lease report in October.
Can you explain, I always forget the convoluted logic about in trying to be more efficient by doubling routes, you actually take it on the chin in terms of funding. In other words, using the bus twice as much, you get paid for it once. Okay.
Well, and actually, we went to a state seminar yesterday. When you have one bus that is running a double route, you turn in and you get reimbursed for one route. But on the second route, you get to charge off the mileage. So we do get to count it on our lease report as one route, even though we are running 2 routes, and we get to charge the mileage on the second route to pay for the fuel.
But you do save on personnel costs.
Yes, sir, you do. We're actually running 138 routes with 123 buses.
And what is budgeted for parts? This speaks highly to the transportation department's, what they do. What is budgeted for parts is only $213,000 for that fleet of buses as far as parts go. So that speaks highly to how well they are maintaining that fleet.
And one other thing I'd like to mention, the new buses we're purchasing, the factory now has given us a 7-year warranty. So nearly, 7 out of the 10 years that we're getting fleet renewal money back also, we're getting a warranty from the factory. So that's also gonna help us out in parts.
How many miles do you get on a set of tires?
Well, and that's another thing too. We have a bid out currently for recaps. We were having to buy new tires, and we can buy recaps for the rear of the bus, so that's also going to save us. A new tire is $350. A recap's about $108. So that's also going to help us save a lot of money also.
You all do a good job, I tell you that.
Thank you, sir.
Can I ask a question too, just to clarify something for me personally? Based on my activity report from last year's discretionary funds, I have that I received this amount from Hoover City Board of Education, $339,063, which equates to $85 per student. I'm curious to know where the $125 per student mark is. Now, there's a line item on here for CTE funds of $11,000. There's also $75,000 for band uniforms, an additional note right at $26,000 for additional band uniforms. But then I had to pay out of my discretionary funds at the end because it was not covered by all the cost, approximately $15,000 more dollars. So I'm just, and then IB school reimbursement So are we adding this into what we consider my $125 per student? Because the actual discretionary fund that I was left available was $339,000, which, $339,062, which equates to $85 per student. I'm
What-
just curious where,
The formula that I had that was used last year, the spreadsheet that I located, it states that academic instructional was given to each school up to the amount of $45 per student. Office, and doesn't really explain, I guess, whatever you need to use it for, was $15 per student, and technology supplement of $50 per student. And that totaled what, that amount actually totaled what was, sent out to the schools. When you look at what was sent actually to the schools, that was, that
and then I
equals
had
that
to take
amount.
$83,729 out in state allocated funds. That goes directly to teachers or to whatever that amount was last year. The state supplied, was teacher supplies, technology, library enhancement, those type of things.
Yes, it did include that, but there's separate columns on that spreadsheet that was used to calculate that amount. $45 more for academics, $15 more per student for office, and $50 more for technology.
So in addition to what the state set aside in each of those categories,
Yes.
in addition to that, there was $45 additional per student for academics, an additional $15 per student for office, and another $50 per student for tech. And that was above what the state had allocated. And we can sit down, Don, and look at that together if we
Yeah,
need to.
just, I'm just curious why that isn't shown somewhere on this, because we pulled that today. With my bookkeeper calculated that, and it was exactly the amount that I'd allocated, is what we had on the spreadsheet we pulled today. So I'm just curious where that discrepancy is, and where that money would be.
So what are you thinking the discretionary amount was then?
Based on anything I could calculate, it was $85. It comes out to a penny that it was at.
$85 per student is your calculation
Per student.
versus
And
the
I think that's
125
what
that,
I'm not speaking for you, but I think that's what you have too.
okay.
And $83,729 of that had to come out of my discretionary, that funds that were sent to me to go directly to the teacher. And I'll have to look back and see exactly how much technology was.
But that was not your discretionary amount. So there is a certain amount that's set aside per teachers that has to go
Or
to
if
the
we had
teachers.
If we had library enhancement monies, or we had technology.
Yeah,
or we-
has to
yes,
go to those.
That comes out, okay?
Doesn't come out of this 45, 15, and 50.
So I'm just curious, where that's at.
Okay. So the difference is, we're saying 125, you're calculating it to be 85 above what the state sent. And we'll be glad to sit down and look at that.
Correct, yeah.
So rather than 125 to 25, your calculation is it's 85 to 25.
Yeah, but I'd like to have got 125 last year, if that was the case.
Yeah.
In much better shape.
Okay.
I'm just trying to reconcile what I actually.
I will be very honest to say to you, we've had a very difficult time with the spreadsheets and lining them up and getting them all to make good sense for me, and I'm sure that's on me, but we'll be happy to look at that again.
Any other questions
You
from the
said
public?
what you found, right?
Right,
That's
it's
like
What I found.
what you found.
That's the spreadsheet that I found. And I, as Dr. Murphy and I
Well,
did
and what we can
discuss.
do is we can basically look at those spreadsheets and then see what we sent to schools. And that's not difficult. We have a
Right.
calculation, and then we'll see what money left this building to go to those schools, transfer to those schools for discretionary monies. It's not really a particular secret, is it, Michelle? I mean,
No.
it should be easy enough for us to look at that.
And what I gave you
in your packet from last year, I did look that up, is what was sent. That first page for the 2015-16, that total at the bottom was what was sent. But that was not the amount sent from discretionary, or yes?
Yes, that was the amount that was sent, because as Mr. Hewlin did, of course, that included those state funds, but then it also included the state discretionary. They did one line item and sent it as a total.
But that's the question. Not mixing state.
Right.
Is this mixing state or not mixing state?
What I found that equaled was what did include the state. The line item that showed the actual amount sent included the state.
Yes, sir.
There's a question on when you get down to the kind of the end of the spectrum, you've got your debt service is to the dollar what is projected on your spreadsheets. I got that from Trish's website. I mean, you're right on. But your capital, based on previous budgets, has been where you've gone down quite a bit. With that capital budget and being as tight as it is, when you get down to those two aspects, you look like you're very, very tight on those two things. Would that be where money coming in from, say, the sale of Berry High School, would that be allocated there? Would you spread it all over the place? I'm kind of figuring out how those things factor in. And if there was more money from the city council going in, how you would allocate that, because capital is so tight and then that debt service is so tight, and you've got that overhead in the debt service where you're putting so little toward the principal. Can you kind of explain those things there?
Sure. In talking to our principals, it's been made very clear, if you have a nice house, you ought to take care of your nice house. So there has certainly been those conversations about things in our buildings and on our campuses that need our attention. So with the assumption of the sale of Berry, and I say assumption because the money's not in my hand, but assuming the sale of that property, then I will very thoughtfully come back to this board and say to them, you know, here are some projects that really need our attention so that we are taking care of what we already have. Would that whole $11 million be proposed in such a fashion? Probably not. But would some amount of that money be about going back to our campuses and addressing some of those things that are being brought to our attention? Yes.
Thank you.
I think it's helpful too, on that same vein, talk about how the actual debt service jumps at 18.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no choice about it. As Kurt says, I mean, it's to the penny, and it's to the penny a lot more than it is currently.
Absolutely. Tuesday night, we said this is a tight budget, and it's a conservative budget, and there is no fluff. So yes, what we have presented is something extremely tight, and honestly, extremely, perhaps appropriate word, painful, because it does not include all of the things that we've been able to do in the past. And so I've kind of described it this way a time or two. You know, which side of the chin do you want to take it on? You're going to cut back on some of the expenditure and leave us as we are tonight, talking about, wow, there's good productive things going on when we send discretionary money out, but we don't have that money now to send out. So you take that one, or you come to the board and say, hey, here's your another multi-million-dollar deficit budget. You can't have your cake and eat it too. And by the way, just remind all of you, I've been honest about where we were headed from the time I came into the school district and looked at the finances of the school district. And I've said to you, there's no way we can continue to do what we've been doing not based on the revenue sources we have. This shouldn't be a shock. It shouldn't come as a surprise that this is a very tight budget.
Thank you, Doug Murphy. Thank you, Ms. Hancock, again for your hard work in the 2 months that you've been here. Last night, there were 9 questions submitted. That's the answer to those 9 questions since Tuesday night. So thank you for your hard work. Michelle, whoever all helped with this,
Everybody.
Dr. Dodson. we got this about 5 minutes before we walked in, so we
It
get
was still
to,
warm, right off the press.
we get to go home and read, discover questions, answers to the questions that were asked. If there are no other questions or comments, our next regularly scheduled board meeting will be Monday night, the 12th, here in this room at 5:30. So we are adjourned.
Sir?